Limitation number 5. Promissory estoppel is suspensory in nature. Debate surrounds the issue of whether promissory estoppel operates to extinguish or merely suspend promisor's strict legal rights. In Tool Metal Manufacturing Company Ltd versus Tungsten Electric Company Ltd, 1955, the plaintiffs owned a patent which entitled them to royalties if the defendant manufactured items using the patent. The plaintiffs agreed to waive their rights to royalties after the outbreak of war. After the war was over, the plaintiffs sought to resume their rights to the royalties. Could the plaintiffs revive their original legal rights? Courts held that the plaintiff's promise was enforceable during the war period. However, the plaintiff could revive their legal entitlement to royalties by giving reasonable notice. So, according to this case, promissory estoppel suspends the rights and do not extinguish them. So, according to this case, promissory estoppel suspends the rights and does not extinguish them. This case deals with the question of the extent to which or the duration for which it will prevent someone going back on a pre-existing promise. We know that the promisor is estopped from asserting his strict contractual rights when he has promised not to do so, but is the effect of this estoppel temporary or permanent? The question generally arises when there is a contract with recurrent or continuing obligations. Some cases suggest that promissory estoppel extinguishes the promisor's rights forever, but others suggest that the original contract can be resurrected by giving notice. In this latter case, the promissory estoppel is suspensory only. As in Tool Metal Manufacturing Company Ltd versus Tungsten Electric Company Ltd, 1955, the owner of a patent promised not to enforce the strict rights he had under a contract. He did this because the Second World War interrupted the contract, as in High Trees, and the Court of Appeal held that the promise could be revoked by giving reasonable notice. In other words, the promissory estoppel only operated to suspend the strict rights under the contract, and not to extinguish them entirely. In High Trees, Lord Denning appeared to say that the right to collect full rent for the war years had been extinguished, but this did not apply to the years after the war, because the promise was only meant to apply for the war years. Now, this might appear to be a different route to the same solution, if it makes little difference whether the estoppel is said to be suspensory in effect or whether the promise is held to relate to a specific or limited time. But in High Trees, the obligation to pay the full rent during the war years was not suspended. Those particular obligations were extinguished forever, even if the obligations to pay the full rent in the years after the war were unaffected and thus revived. In reality, the exact effect of promissory estoppel in a particular case will depend on the precise nature of the promise made and to what extent it would be inequitable to allow the promisor to go back on it. But there seems little doubt that in an appropriate case, particular legal rights can in effect be extinguished.